Welcome to MacNeil Tech, the wash experience. My name is Scott Ferry and I work for Budco Distributing, a distributor of MacNeil wash systems. Today we're going to talk about the SuperFlex motor replacement. But before we begin, it's good to suggest to put a piece of cardboard or a tarp over the grating in the event that something is dropped. Anytime we perform service on the SuperFlex wraparounds, we want to shut the air off and bleed off the excess. So, we use this ball valve to shut off the air, and then we can override one of these solenoids to bleed off the excess. Before we perform any service on an electric motor or any electric device, it's vitally important that we use a lockout tagout to secure the motor in a safe position. It is not enough to have somebody watch the panel. That has to be locked out, and you as a service technician must retain the key so that no one else can enable that electric device. In this case, we're going to disable the VFD or the power out to the SuperFlex wraparound motor. So in a MacNeil panel, we'll notice that we have a label here that says VFD 1515. In order to disconnect power to this VFD, we'll find a corresponding circuit breaker that's labeled 1515, so CB or circuit breaker 1515. So to disconnect power, we turn the disconnect to the off position, then we pull a tab out. Now when this tab is pulled out, it is impossible to turn that to the on position. And then we can take a padlock and put it through the handle, lock it, and then remove the key. And as long as that key is retained in the possession of the service technician, that motor cannot be enabled. Now that we've disconnected the power to the motor by using a lockout tagout kit, we can safely enter the motor-mounted junction box and disconnect our wiring. So we've already removed 3 screws, so we'll go ahead and remove the 4th. And we'll pay careful attention to make sure that we don't lose the screw by placing it in the cover. Now we're going to use a 6mm or 7mm wrench, or nut driver, to disconnect our wiring. Now if you'll notice, we've already labeled our wires because it is very important that we have our rotation correct. And it's easier to hook the wires out, back up how they were disconnected. So we can do that by using the nut driver and disconnecting each wire. Now again, having the box cover on the ladder as a holding place for these nuts and washers is a good idea. Okay, and then we also have, see, I just dropped something. So we have our wires disconnected. We also have our ground wire to disconnect. And then at that point, we can now remove our conduit from the motor housing. Once we've disconnected our wiring, we need to disconnect the dampening cylinders from the vertical shaft. So the way we do that is we take this cylinder off here and this cylinder off here. So I'll go ahead and do that. Again, make sure you don't drop anything, like a wrench. those zip ties. Now that we've disconnected the cylinders from the mounting points, we're going to go ahead and use a zip tie to secure them out of the way. But we have to make sure that we manage the zip tie so that it goes together smoothly. So there we go. Now we have them out of the way and we can freely work over in this area. Now that we've removed and secured the dampening cylinders, we're going to remove these 3 bolts, and we're also going to loosen this one. And that is going to allow us to tilt the brush to allow us access and be able to remove the motor. Now that we've removed 3 of the 4 bolts holding the vertical arm assembly, we are going to tilt the brush and pin it using one of the bolts that we removed, and that will give us access to the top of the motor and be able to remove the motor from the brush shaft. Now this can be done by one person, however it does make it easier if somebody is there to assist you. So we're going to go ahead and perform this function. There we go. Okay, so now we have the bolt is holding this, and as you can see, it has now tilted the motor and is going to allow us to remove the motor from the brush shaft. Now that we've tilted the brush and secured it in place using one of the bolts, we're going to remove the motor cap. Now we're doing this using a 6mm Allen wrench. Now with the cap removed, it reveals the shaft retaining bushing here, and to remove that we use a 5/16 inch Allen wrench, and that will loosen this Allen socket cap screw, and then we can remove the bushing. Our next step is to remove the 4 bolts securing the motor to the top plate of the vertical arm. So we've already removed 2 of them, and we're going to use a 9/16 inch wrench to remove the final bolt. Yep, except we got to have it go in the right direction. So once we remove that, then we can at this point remove the brush or the motor from the brush shaft. Now at this point, if it's an older brush, you may run into difficulty as it may be seized or frozen on the shaft. And one of the things I've done in the past to make this a much easier task is to assign another technician to do it. But in the case that that's not available, it may require a puller or something else to get it free from the shaft. Using the pry bar or a screwdriver, you can remove that from the shaft. There we go. And now we have a motor free from the shaft, and at this point the motor mounting plate is secured by 6 screws, which can be removed with the 6mm Allen wrench. Okay, so we have now replaced the motor onto the motor mounting plate using the 6 bolts or screws to attach it. Now you'll notice that we left one screw in as we reassembled it because there's not enough clearance between the motor and the plate to slide this in once we've put the motor back on this plate. We've also come through and we've applied anti-seize to the brush shaft, and we've also made sure that our key is in place. So we're going to go ahead and put this back on. Now we're going to note the orientation of our keyway inside here, and then we're going to rotate our brush so to make the assembly easier. So very carefully we take this, whoop, and it's a little heavy and awkward, but so we slide that over the shaft, make sure our bolt lines up. Now that this is secure, we can go ahead and replace our 4 bolts that secure this motor mounting plate to the vertical arm assembly and tighten her down. So we've gone ahead and replaced the 4 bolts that tighten the motor mounting plate to the vertical brush assembly. We've also put the shaft retaining bushing and the motor cap back on. So now it's time to untilt the brush. And so we do that by forcing it out to a point that we have some leverage, and we just kind of okay. So now that it's untilted, we can go ahead and put our bolts back in. Now, one thing to point out is anytime you're assembling stainless steel hardware, it's vitally important to put anti-seize on your bolts. And even though these have been anti-seized once before, it wouldn't be a bad idea to apply a little bit more again to ensure that they don't gall up on reassembly. Now that we've reconnected our dampening cylinders and we've tightened down the bolts to secure the vertical shaft or the vertical arm assembly, we're going to reconnect all of our electrical connections. We have 2 of the 3 wires connected already, as well as the ground. Now, before we disassembled the brush, we actually marked our wires because it's imperative that those wires go back in the exact same place they were landed before. And that is so that our brush rotation is correct. The brush rotation is extremely critical. So we're going to go ahead and reconnect our last wire, and then we'll replace the box cover. So again, this is using a 7mm nut driver. So all of those are connected. Now we'll go ahead and put our box cover back, and taking care to make sure that wires don't get pinched between the box cover and the box itself. Now that we've concluded our wrap service, we're going to go ahead and turn the air back on. Now that we've completed our service and we have all the wires secure on the electric motor, we can go ahead and remove the lockout on the electrical device. So we come back in the panel, the electrician or the service technician that locked it out takes the key, removes the lock, and turns it back to the on position. And that concludes our demonstration on how to remove and replace the motor on a SuperFlex wraparound brush. Thank you for joining us at MacNeil Tech, the Wash Experience.